You might have seen people fasting for diet purposes. You might also have seen people fasting for religious purposes or spiritual awakening. What you might not have seen is someone so obsessed with fasting and starvation that they consider it a cure for virtually every ailment, including cancer. This is the story of Dr. Linda Hazzard, an American quack, swindler, and convicted serial killer. She killed at least 15 people through her fasting treatment in a sanitarium that she operated near Seattle. According to her book, The Science of Fasting, the main motivation behind her treatment method was Dr. Edward Hooker Dewey, MD, a well-known proponent of fasting. He emphasized that fasting allows the digestive system to rest and be cleansed by removing impurities from the body. The monster inside Dr. Linda Hazzard used this research for her own personal gains, so much so that she ended up becoming a serial killer. Not only did she kill her victims by starving them to death, but she also forged their wills and stole most of their valuables. Welcome back to another episode of Twisted Minds. My name is James, and today we'll dig deep into this story involving torture and murder under the guise of medical care. The murderer in this story was given the nickname Starvation Doctor because of how she killed her victims. The eldest of 8 children, Linda Laura Burfield was born in 1867 in Carver, Minnesota. In 1898, she left her family to pursue a career in Minneapolis. She started studying to become a nurse in osteopathy. Linda was a woman of strong character and patience who practiced as a healer until she, taking advantage of a loophole in the law of the state of Washington, obtained the title of dietitian doctor. The woman let herself be persuaded by the theories of Dr. Edward Hooker Dewey, who in 1895 had stated in the book, The True Science of Living, that every disease that affects mankind develops from a more or less habitual in excess of the supply of gastric juices. Linda even wrote 3 books to explain the science behind fasting and how it could cure diseases. She always called herself a doctor, despite not having obtained any degree. In her first book, Fasting for the Cure of Disease, she mentioned the names of several patients who lost their lives while taking her treatments, but blamed their death on other issues, such as organic deficiency. She married Sam Hazzard, who remained by her side until 1938, the year of his death. A drunk, lecher, and swindler, he had married twice before and hadn't bothered to divorce at least one of the wives when he was married to Linda. There was a highly publicized trial for bigamy, ending a 2-year prison sentence for Sam. After Sam finished his sentence in 1906, the couple was set out for Washington State to start over. Linda Hazzard began practicing in Seattle, commuting by ferry from a 40-acre spread in the Kitsap County town of Olalla, she named Wilderness Heights. It was 1908 when the first patient lost their life due to her treatment. After the coroner determined that the cause of death was starvation, he tried to get her prosecuted, but since she wasn't licensed to practice medicine, she wasn't held accountable. How Linda kept getting away with murder will surely blow your mind. This was because, according to the gossip of the time, Dr. Linda had surrounded herself with politically powerful lovers who allowed her to practice medicine despite not having a degree, and to publish several books, including Fasting for the Cure of Disease, 1908, in which she spoke of various fasting cures for various diseases, including cancer. But the goal of this therapy was anything but noble or scientific. She dusted off her parents' vegetarian diet and started working on her famous fasting therapy. It consisted of administering tomato and asparagus juices, sometimes accompanied by a teaspoon of orange juice, and the daily practice of enemas. Linda Hazzard was officially a nurse, but it took little time to become a true guru of the beauty at all costs philosophy. Rich English and American heiresses were willing to do anything to remain eternally beautiful and young at the beginning of the 20th century. They were willing to try the fasting specialist's miracle therapy, even at the cost of dying. However, Linda Hazard was not actually preaching anything new. In the 18th century, Peter Veniaminov of Moscow University wrote a document on the relationship between fasting and disease prevention, thus getting into the study and practice of food deprivation for therapeutic and health purposes in the following century. For most doctors, fasting treatment was considered to be the practice of charlatans, but Dr. Linda, the beautiful American nurse, changed the tables by giving starvation therapy a scientific value that hardly anyone dared to question. Linda believed that overeating was the cause of most illnesses, and that fasting would remove toxins from the body, correct imbalances, and allow the body to heal itself. To make the program more attractive, she added some embellishments of her own. Her book deeply emphasized how fasting can cleanse and cure the body and make you look younger. Her work proposed that all diseases could be cured through fasting and starvation. This consisted of prolonged fasts, in which only asparagus and watery tomato soup were consumed twice daily. In addition to fasting, the patients were subjected to painful osteopathic manipulations, prolonged emenas, and other indignities. The next part of starvation therapy involved massage. This involved Linda beating her fists against the patient's foreheads and backs. As per a witness, Linda shouted, "Eliminate, eliminate," while punching the patients with full force. It is reported that the cries of the patients were heard miles away during these procedures. The diet promised miracles. It promised detoxification of tissues, resulting in the regeneration of the skin. It promised recovery from multiple diseases, even fatal ones. Soon, more and more patients started to arrive at her sanitarium in the town of Olalo, with the eloquent name Wilderness Heights. Most patients had advanced stage diabetes, severe liver degeneration, or syphilis. Rich women also came forward in the search for eternal youth. These patients willingly participated in her deathly therapy. She was renamed Starvation Doctor by her patients. To everyone's surprise, she started gathering positive reviews about her treatment. Even the local freethinkers started praising the effects that starvation therapy brought. However, a dozen deaths occurred in her clinic in the space of a few years. Considering that she always preyed upon wealthy people, many notable people lost their lives due to this therapy. These included Frank Southard, a law partner in the firm Morris, Southard and Shipley. Another influential victim was 26-year-old Eugene Stanley Wakelin, the son of a British lord. His decomposing body was found near Hazard's property. Unlike the other victims, he had died due to the bullet in his head. A presumed suicide, Linda Hazard had power of attorney over the young man's estate, and she wired his lawyer, complaining she needed more funds to pay for his bill at the mortuary. It was later speculated that he had been shot by the Hazards. The Hazards were frustrated to learn that despite his aristocratic family, he wasn't rich. Even though the deaths were reported, the health director of Seattle said he couldn't intervene since Dr. Hazard wasn't licensed. Surprisingly, Linda had been appointed sole administrator of the victims' property after their deaths. Officially on their death certificates, Linda wrote that the cause of deaths were diseases such as cancer and cirrhosis of the liver, but that was probably not the case. She carried out the autopsies in her bathtub and claimed that they had died of sudden diseases, such as cirrhosis, rather than starvation. The house where she lived still exists, and the original bathtub remains. Hazard's defense was that all of the witnesses were lying, and that the medical establishment had conspired against her out of jealousy. She claimed that she had cured patients that no other medical professional could. Former patients of hers were not allowed to testify. One of Linda's victims, Earl Edwards Erdman, maintained a diary while at the sanitarium. Throughout his stay, his only solid food was oranges and tomato broth. Among the patients who tried the starvation therapy were the Williamson sisters, Claire and Dorothea Williamson. The two wealthy British women in their early 30s came to Dr. Linda to experience the charms of alternative medicine. They had come across Linda's work after they read about her book in an advertisement. Once they ordered the book, they received a brochure promoting the Institute of Natural Therapeutics in Olalla. They decided to experience the fasting cure but didn't tell the family. Their relatives were already scornful of their interest in unorthodox medicine. Once the sisters joined the program, Linda began to inquire about the sisters' business affairs and offered to store the women's diamond rings and real estate deeds in her office safe. She was clearly up to no good. Initially, Linda put the Williamson sisters on a frugal diet of tomato soup. After that, the sisters were put through numerous enemas. Lack of food and a dangerous treatment led to a sharp decline in the health of both sisters. The way they were treated by Linda is the stuff of nightmares. They had become fatigued, had difficulty walking, suffered pain, and were eventually too weak to get out of bed. Claire was 33 years old and died after undergoing Linda's treatment for over 3 months. She weighed 23 kilograms. In May 1911, the sisters' family received the terrible news of Claire's death and went to retrieve her body. The only reason the situation came to light was that Dora smuggled a message to a friend in Australia. When the family arrived and notified the authorities, Claire was dead. In the sanatorium, they found Dora, who was severely malnourished, underweight, and ill. She was found to be suffering from rheumatism and indigestion. Hazard had performed the autopsy of Claire's body and said that she died from cirrhosis. Dora was shown her body, but she did not recognize it as her sister's, and she believed that it had been replaced by another corpse that weighed more. If not for the timely intervention of a family member, Dora too would have met the same fate as her sister. Furthermore, it was discovered that Linda was appointed executor of Claire's estate prior to her death. When Dora saw her family, she begged them to take her away. Surprisingly, she withdrew her request the very next day. She insisted that the cure was keeping her healthy and fine. What was Linda doing? Was she controlling her mind? Could Dora not see that she was dying? Surely she could see that her flesh was melting and that 50 pounds was unhealthy for an adult. She had lost the ability to make decisions for herself and was completely under the influence of Linda's strong personality. One of the family members was Margaret Conway, the sisters' childhood nanny. She tried to feed Dora solid, nutritious food. Although the patients were not usually allowed to communicate with each other, they were all let out on special occasions. On the 4th of July, 2 of Linda's patients approached Margaret Conway and begged her to get them out of the place. According to them, they were being treated as prisoners. Another surprising thing was that the nanny noticed how Linda was wearing Claire's silk dressing gown and her favorite hat. She ultimately found out that Dora had given Hazard power of attorney. Dora had signed a power of attorney to Linda's husband, Samuel C. Hazard. When Linda learned that Dora's family was trying to take her away, she immediately started protesting. The Williamson family successfully obtained Dora's legal guardianship and got her out of Wilderness Heights. The criminal system she had set up with her husband came to light in 1912, when Claire Williamson, a wealthy British woman, died in her clinic. To accuse Linda of murder was Dora Williamson, sister of the victim who miraculously survived the therapy of the starvation doctor. During the trial, it came to light that Linda was putting assets of the deceased patients in her name. At the trial, Linda said that this was part of the treatment and that the patients would be fine in a few days. In a deposition, Claire's sister said that she thought the whole care system was poisoned. Then, at the trial, witnesses spoke of how the patients were treated. In practice, they almost completely fasted until they believed they were starving to death. Some said they felt weak and couldn't move their legs in bed. Linda said that the deaths had nothing to do with fasting. It was the other diseases like cancer or cirrhosis of the liver that took away the lives of the patients. Once in court, numerous nurses and housekeepers at the sanatorium testified against Linda and revealed the horror stories to the world. At the same time, court-appointed physicians confirmed that Williamson's death was caused by starvation. Linda defended herself by stating that she had been the victim of organized persecution by traditional doctors who were jealous of her because, she said, she treated patients they could not heal. After several trials and investigations, Linda was arrested and charged with first-degree murder in August 1911. However, after serving some time, she was released on parole on December 26, 1915. Her husband, Samuel Hazard, was equally involved in the crimes. Following Dora's witness statements and an investigation into Linda's clinic, authorities realized that in addition to being responsible for the deaths of several patients, Linda and her husband had also robbed them, or at times had induced them to give up their possessions. Together, they conspired to steal patients' jewelry and clothing, falsified documents, and had patients falsely declared mentally ill and incompetent, thus gaining legal powers to seize their patients' assets and enrich themselves. They even removed gold fillings from the corpses of patients to sell to a dentist. Over time, several other cases of people who died under Dr. Hazard's care were discovered. The main accusation started from the Williamson family, as the money Claire had given the doctor had not been returned. In 1915, Linda was paroled, and later, in 1916, was pardoned by the then governor of Washington State, Ernest Lister. After the pardon, she and her husband moved to New Zealand. Linda started practicing as a dietitian and osteopath until she was charged in Auckland for using the title of doctor without registration. She was found guilty of practicing medicine without a license and was fined £5 plus court costs. A lot of money was made in New Zealand as she operated under the title of physician, dietitian, and osteopath. She even published new books. By then, she had saved enough money to build her dream sanitarium at Starvation Heights. The following year, she returned to Olalla and built a larger sanitarium. Her Washington license had been revoked, but she got around the law by calling her new sanitarium a health school. In 1920, she returned to Olalla and started a new clinic, albeit unofficially, where she resorted to fasting treatment. However, Linda could not use the doctor's title this time and relied mostly on word of mouth to get patients. In 1935, the clinic suffered a major fire and was completely demolished, leaving Linda unemployed. However, she decided it was time to step away from the limelight and started leading a more private life. In 1938, reports mentioned that Linda had taken her last breath during self-treatment using her own methods. She had died of starvation. History is replete with doctors who practice quackery. The story of Dr. Linda Hazard is one of sadistic and greedy quack who robbed the victims of their properties after offering them a miraculous starvation treatment. Under the guise of science, she made her patients fast so severely that some of them died of starvation. She is believed to have been responsible for at least 14 deaths in a 4-year period. She was convicted of murder, but exited prison after 2 years and returned to her old practices. You might think that Linda Hazard was misguided with good intentions, but that's not true. In the case of the Williamson sisters, Linda and her husband were appointed attorneys, in fact, executors, and guardians for life. They had already taken jewelry from the sisters valued at over $6,000, and Claire's trousseau upon her death. In investigations carried out by the girl's uncle, it was discovered that other wealthy people had transferred their property and money to Linda before they passed away. Patients of all sorts used to come to her. People who wanted to look younger, people who wanted to try alternative medicine, people who hoped that they would be cured of fatal diseases. Unsurprisingly, most of her patients died of starvation. Once it was proved that she intentionally starved her patients to death for monetary gains, the prosecutor called her a financial starvation. You know what's scarier? Despite the fact that it's well known that her methods led to death and that she herself died following them, some groups continue to publish her books and propagate her doctrine. Thanks for tuning into Twisted Minds. That was the case of Dr. Linda Hazzard, and why don't you go ahead and click on one of the 2 videos on your screen for another one of our videos.